this analysis. It's an older video, but it's probably the best that I know of that gives the succinct history of it. So what happened to it prior to the 1200s, when in Lire, France, it was first noted? Where did it come before that? Okay. Without going into my own version of the history, I'd rather you see it and hear it for yourself, so that you can get the facts straight rather than from my secondhand remembering. All right? But just note that all that you've heard so far are part of those analyses that have been done through the years. It's a remarkable relic in my mind, in my estimation. By the way, if you ever want to know how tall Jesus was, he was 5'11".
Wow, I thought.
Quite tall for someone in that day. It's 5'11". The whole shroud is about 14 feet long, if I'm not mistaken, because it's a single cloth. Yeah, about 5'11". Yes.
Also, could they date the pollen or not?
That I don't know. It may not be possible because they're too small of a grain to actually carbon date it. By the way, what's the explanation as to why it carbon dates only to the Middle Ages? One explanation is that the samples that they took of the shroud were not of the shroud itself, but of the patches that were done to it by the sisters after the 1572 fire, which would make a little bit more sense. The second explanation is that carbon-14 dating depends on the integrity of the object in which it's being dated. What does that mean? If something happens to, let's say I have a piece of pottery and I want to date it. If the pottery has been exposed to some kind of carbonization process, it will taint the carbon-14 test because it carbonizes the object. Since we know the shroud has been exposed to fire in the past, it's possible that the 1572 fire carbonized the shroud and therefore tainted the sample that is given. To me, that's a logical explanation. Others would say, you're just trying to push it, Chip. And I go into your laboratory and give me a copy of the shroud. Ready, set, go. Thank you, now shut up. Don't talk to me, I have blind faith. I think that there is far more evidence than one carbon-14 test that tells me that there is something more here than a medieval fraud. Something more is here. What? I don't know, but it indicates strongly that this is probably the shroud that covered the Lord's body. Then what produced it? The resurrection. When Jesus' physical body was transformed, could there have been this burst, if you will, of radiation that burned the image onto the shroud like a photograph? I don't see why not. And that's what was left behind. The world's first photograph of Jesus. So there you are. It took way too much time, but I think in the middle of Passion Week, we're allowed to be a little bit more attentive to our Lord and his passion. I frequently, when meditating on the sorrowful mysteries, I think of this image, because in it you have here a record if you will, of all the sorrowful mysteries. All of it. Scourging at the pillar, the crowning with thorns, the carrying of the cross, and the crucifixion itself. All you have to do is meditate on a particular part.
We have a question back here for you.
Yes. I see that hand.
On a sidebar, when they nailed Christ to the cross, the way you explained it, how can you explain the stigmata that saints receive?
The stigmata that the saints receive, like Padre Pio got it right here. That's a good question. I don't immediately have an explanation for that, other than the fact that they are imitating Christ's passion. I don't have another explanation beyond that. By the way, you do know that Padre Pio not only had wounds in his hands, he had them in his feet and on his side. You are aware of that. That's why whenever you see pictures or videos of Padre Pio when he's walking, he kind of like shuffles a little bit, or he has someone helping him, because he can't stand on his feet because there are these holes in his feet. Can you imagine walking? He bled a cup of blood a day, I understand. Cup of blood. And his stigmata never got infected. And those around him, his attending physicians and whatnot, remarked that there was the scent of roses around him.
He lost quite a bit of blood.
Yes. But he never was anemic or sick in that respect. So again, if we're talking hysteria wouldn't do that. It would take a physical toll on the body eventually, and the body would respond. His did. And when he died, the stigmata left him. It was gone. Not there anymore. Hysteria wouldn't do that. Now that's a common explanation. Well, he was a religious hysteric. Self-inflicted of some kind. It's like, once again, you're grasping at straws because you don't want to believe. Now they would respond, well, we're not looking at the scientific explanation of this because you're wanting to believe. And I'd say, once again, let's look at the facts and then let's see who is deluding who. Don't be pressed into this corner that many of our contemporary agnostics and atheists like to paint themselves into. Well, you're just, it's blind faith. I personally resent that remark. I consider myself a very well-literate, science-minded person. I accept the realities of science and technology that we have around us. And I'm looking at this from a rational point of view. And to me, it is more rational to believe in the existence of a God and the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead than any other explanation I can see that explains everything else around us. Everything else that I've heard about it, you have to make these big, enormous mental jumps that don't make sense logically. Okay? We just go with that. Yes?
My coworker, whenever I show him the scientific study, well, the scientists were Catholic or whatever, they already have the bias, they know exactly what they're looking at, they had the information, so it's not a real study. How can I respond to that?
Most of the scientists that, from what I understand, who examined the shroud weren't necessarily believers of any kind, let alone Catholic. I can tell you this, I know that the doctors that work at Lourdes are not Catholic. They're not even believers, they're just doctors. The church actually, if you will, prefers non-believing doctors investigating miraculous claims at Lourdes because it adds to the credibility Because if they can't come up with an explanation, then they're not going to say it was God. They're just going to say, we don't have one, and that's what you need to prove a miracle. There were some, from what I understand, believers, Christians of various denominations that were involved, that were scientists. But I honestly don't think that they had a bone to pick, because any sort of self-serving bias on their account would have been immediately brought up by other scientific community members. This says that this is a fraud, this is a hoax, they're making stuff up, they're trying to make a point. This is not real blood on the shroud, this is goat's blood, or dove's blood, or cat's blood. You know what I'm saying? But the facts speak for themselves, independent of whether you want to believe in it or not. There's no paint, pigment, powder, or dye on the shroud. You can't dispute that. Get over yourself. Okay? Things like that you can't argue, because there's nothing to argue about. You know? So go on.
And do you know of any of the studies that were done with Eucharistic miracles that they came up with the AB blood type before the shroud was tested?
The only one I know of for sure is the one that was done on the Eucharistic miracle in Lanciano. That was done, I believe, in 1972. I would look that one up. Since then, other Eucharistic miracles have gone through similar analyses by scientists to determine, what are they and what's their composition, and they've come up with the same kinds of analyses. But those you would have to look up. I do not know those offhand. Okay? Are we good? This isn't the end of this, trust me. Like I said, during Holy Week, I do want to show you a video about the shroud to hopefully encourage your faith, not in this relic, but in Jesus, who is the creator of the relic, to whom we should give our allegiance to. This just gives us a boost in faith, if you will. It's a wow kind of thing, Not to be focused on the sign, but focus on the sign giver is always important. My faith in Jesus is independent of whether we have a shroud or not. You know what I mean? I don't need the shroud to believe that Jesus really rose from the dead. History speaks for itself. Amen. Yes. So this is just a nice bonus. That's how I look at it. It's a nice bonus. But I don't need it, because Jesus has already demonstrated that of himself. Period. This is, like I said, a bonus. And it's an intriguing one, to be sure. It's a mystery. Everyone likes a good mystery. Agatha Christie wouldn't have made her money if people weren't interested in mysteries. This is a mystery. And it's still unsolved. Still unsolved. Nothing definitive, but very intriguing. Very intriguing. Okay? So with that, tonight, what time is left? I want us to get into Revelation chapter 21. Like I said, the beginning of the end of our study in the book of Revelation. And this is about the New Jerusalem. And I think I mentioned last week we ended chapter 20. And if you recall, the beginning of chapter 20 is about the controversial topic, the millennium. Bum, bum, bum. The 1,000-year reign of Christ. And it's really interesting. I happened to pick up one of my commentaries, a Catholic commentary, and I said, I'm just curious now. What does this commentator have to say about the millennium? Just curious. And I read it, and not to pat myself on the back, but to pat myself on the back, he basically agreed with the position that I gave to you. So I felt quite comforted that I wasn't way out there. His basic belief is this: the number 1,000 is an indeterminate number, that it represents the period of the church from the time of Jesus' first advent, when he bound the strong man, the devil, from deceiving the nations to present the gospel to the nations, until he comes again. And then Satan will be released for a little while. This is marked by the battle with the Antichrist that's mentioned in Revelation 19, the end of 19. It's again mentioned in Revelation 20. And then Satan's doom is sealed. At the second coming, Satan will be defeated, thrown into the lake of fire, and then the new heavens and the new earth begin. Yes?
Can you explain the binding of Satan?
Explain it?
Yeah. Because we know, I'm a little confused since we know that Satan can roam the earth now. He's wrestled with saints, so
Yes.
how exactly does that work?
The binding is not a complete binding. It is if you will, a partial binding. It is a limiting of Satan's power of what he can and cannot do in comparison to what? To what he was able to do prior to Jesus' advent. Okay? Let me take you to 1 Corinthians 10. 1 Corinthians 10. This gives you a little bit of insight into that. Yes. Well, here. I always forget I'm in the electronic church. 1 Corinthians 10. This is Paul talking about